Hello, students. Thanks for joining me for our talk on career management and personal branding. I think before we consider the idea of personal career branding, we have to really look back at the history of work. If you go back 600 years, if you go back to the late 1500s as an example, um, before the concept of a job and before the concept of money, people would do something for one another in exchange services and exchange some type of token for those services. Maybe you would put some shoes on a horse for someone and they would go to the local market and you would exchange a piece of bread, as reimbursement. So back in those days, the word of job was really called a gob. It had to do with piecework. And that idea of work has kind of obviously evolved over the years. The French gave us the word career, which means to run fast. And of course, they also gave us the word to retire, which means to fall down and die, essentially. That's the way I think about it. And so, we're kind of caught in this mode of work being something that we run really fast at, and at some point we really stop. And I think that's not a healthy way to look at the nature of work. I'll talk about that in a little bit. Imagine somebody approaches you and says, hey, you want to go to a party? And you're like, no, I have to go to work. So work has always been thought about kind of in an oppressive, negative way. In the early days and, even now, different religions have said, work is a good thing. Work is a good thing. We should work. Work is virtuous. It's helpful to others. So one of the interesting things about work is, first, we're living longer. I mean, 100 years ago, for example, in America, the average lifespan was about 43. Today, it's in the mid 80s. And so it no longer makes sense just to work and one day, stop. The idea is to find something that, you really love to do that you never have to stop. And by the way, my definition again of work is doing what you love for most of the day, for most of your life. The typical path for most people is to, get out of high school, get a diploma, go to college, go through college, take a bunch of courses, graduate, and then get a job, make money, and before long realize, I'm in debt, but that's okay because I'm going to work harder to pay off the debt, and thus begins a cycle of work until somewhere between, for my research, the ages of 38 and 45, people hit a midlife crisis. It could be a divorce, relationship issue, financial issue, a health issue, job layoff, or just, just a sense of anxiety or angst about one's life. So work is important to our sense of self. It's important to our self-esteem. And we're going to be around a long time. And so we really have to kind of, I think, reimagine what work is. Take a moment and think about, what's the definition of wrong work for you? And I think that's work that just feels wrong. There's no interest. It's just a job. And, that leads to unhappiness, which of course is very subjective, but to you, it's most important. I like to talk instead about the definition of right work. You've aligned your abilities and interests. And again, it's better to be interested in something and you'll be motivated to learn, even if you don't have those skills, than to be good at something that you're no longer interested in. And so right work just feels right. It gives you, unlimited energy, and that leads to happiness, which of course is also subjective, but that subjectivity is very important to you. So as we go through this lecture today, tonight, whenever you're looking at this, I want you to write down and kind of think about, what is right work for you? I mean, I find this is challenging for many people because, we're really not taught in school how to think about what are our values, what's most important to us, and thus what work should we do? If we borrow from the field of marketing, we could think about, the concept of a brand. For example, a little boy says to his dad, the brands I love have something special. They're unique. The brands I love understand me better than anyone else. I respect and I trust the brands I love. I know almost everything about the brands I love. And the dad says, There you are, son. You've just reviewed the 4 pillars of any brand: relevance, esteem, knowledge, difference. So for example, I would like you to start to think about these last 4 words as they relate to you and your own career brand. That is, what difference can you make with the work that you do? It's important that you show how your work is relevant to others, whether you're doing specific work or you're selling a service or a product. How can your work make you and others who work with you, your customers, feel good? And how does your work bring knowledge to others? So if we borrow from the field of marketing, you can apply this to start to build your own career brand. So the idea is that a career brand promotes you. On your own, I would like you to answer these questions. First, think about something you really would love to do. If you're working, as an example, in a job right now that you don't like, don't focus on that to answer these questions. Think about something that you're passionate about, and think about, how can I start the path towards doing the work that I really love? And so with that in mind, I would like you, on your own, or actually, by the way, the best way I think to do this lecture is to stop it as we go here and go ahead and answer these questions. So thinking about something you'd really love to do, how would you answer these questions? The difference I make in my work is, my work is relevant because my work brings me esteem because, and the knowledge I share with my work is. So take a moment and just answer these questions. So welcome back. As you start to think about your career brand, it's important that you have a narrow focus. For example, if you were to say that you want to be a teacher, that's not good enough. A teacher of what? For which audience, and so on. The more specific your brand, the better. Imagine you were going to draw a big chart. In the first column, I want you to think about, for example, I don't want this to happen, but what if you were fired tomorrow from your job? And the next day I said, look, you have to survive, you have to sell one product or one service to one person for $1. What would you sell? A product is something that you import and you resell, or you create and you sell. And of course, the service is a service. So think about something you're passionate about, and think about, if you had to sell one product or a service for $1 to one person, what would you sell? And that's test marketing. If you could sell one thing to one person for $1, you could sell 2 things to 2 people for $2, and so on. The second column of this template, which, by the way, you could use as your marketing brochure, if you will, to market you incorporated, will talk about features. Just like a car has air conditioning, what are your best features that relate to your brand? And how would someone benefit from your product or services? People don't buy products or services. They buy what that product or service will do for them. Like right now, I'm a little thirsty. I'm drinking water. I didn't necessarily buy, well, it's a water bottle, but I didn't buy this water bottle because it's red, although it is cool looking. I bought it because it holds water that I need to drink. So similarly for you, what are the benefits that you will offer with your product or service? And the last column would be, and then think about what void you want to fill. If there's no voids, it's going to be hard to sell a product or service. And finally, not only what voids need to be filled, but what niche audience do you want to work with? You want to work with the elderly, children, a specific culture, a specific region of the world. So this template helps you kind of get really clear about what you might do. So take a moment and stop this video and answer these questions again, thinking about yourself as a product or service around your passions and what you'd really like to do. And answer the question, my services are, my niche is, your focus, my features are, and a client would benefit from my. So just, plant a seed here. Just starting to think about yourself this way will empower you. You will feel more like a free agent versus just, I have a job at XYZ. And as you start to practice this and define this, you get much more clear about what it is that you might want to do. Often, sometimes it just takes, you may like the work that you do and you may like the industry that you do, but you have a bad boss. And so you have to move to something else within the same industry. Sometimes you have to move between industries. And as you can see on the slide, sometimes you have to make changes completely. So as you start to redefine, recreate your brand, think about, what changes you might have to make. So let's talk about your resume a little bit. I'm going to give you some advice that I'm sure you already know. But now that you've defined your career brand, it's really important to start to put on paper. I think you need three pieces of collateral. One is you need, whether it's the 10P model that I teach, you need some kind of a plan, right? That addresses your values and your short, medium-term, long-term goals. And that's something that you review on a regular basis. So number one, you need to have a plan. And in just a moment, I'll talk about the CV, or for most of you, we'll use a resume. I think also what can be helpful is writing your biography, 2 to 3 years from now in second person. So like if your name is John, you might say, 3 years from now, John is, and you describe the life that you really want to live, including your work. And then you go back and you write today's bio. And only then does magic occur. Be careful what you write because you'll start to move towards it. But when you write your future biography and you contrast that to your current biography, you see what's called a gap. And without a gap, there's no problem. There's no room to move. But with a gap, you could start to, close the gap. And then in a moment, I'll talk about building your network. So let's talk about CV a little bit. First, depending on what you're focused on, figure out what the key words are that should be on your resume. You could do a Google search. There's books on this. For example, if you want to go into marketing, you should find out what those keywords are for marketing. And those keywords should be put into your resume, and it would be okay to bold them. Because most of the time when a resume is sent in, it's not even seen initially by a real person. Software scans it. Clearly, at the top of your CV, have your contact information. It's amazing to me, how often that people forget to put that. Fortunately, anyway, in the U.S., I was going to say, as an example, Americans are not required to put their picture, their height, their weight, their marital status. I think that's a good thing. In other parts of the world, that is kind of expected, and that's a requirement. The next part of your resume that I think is the most important is what I call your job objective. I would just call it, objectives. And I think there's three pieces of information that are really important here. This is your infomercial. So the first piece is you want to give the reader a clear idea as to, how many years of work you have. So you might say 3 years of increased responsibility doing XYZ, or 6 months, or 4 years, or 2 years, whatever it is for you. The second part is key skills include. I think it's important to list 3 or 4 key skills that you have related to what you're seeking. And that brings me to the third line, which is currently seeking. This is where you tell the reader exactly what you're looking for. So basically, the objective should read something like this. 5 years of increased responsibility. Those are always two good words to say. In the banking industry, period. Key skills include, teller operations, customer service, and account reconciliation, period. Currently seeking supervisor position in the banking industry. So that's the first part. Next, go into your employee history. I think if you have more than 5 years experience, I would aim for a 2-page resume. If you have less than 5 years experience, I think it's important to have just get everything down to 1 page. So chronologically list your jobs that you've had from most recent. Um, if you've had a job that didn't work out, don't list it. That's okay. You just have to have a story around why you didn't. You have, if you don't list it, you have to have a story about why there might be a gap. That's all. Maybe there's a 6-month gap in your work history. You could say, well, I took off to travel, I took off to finish school, etc. And then for each job that you've had, if you've had budget responsibility or people responsibility, you supervise people, start with that. So you might put, for example, so you put Intel Corporation, 2016 through present. Do not put dates. It just causes unnecessary conversation. People want to know, well, why was there a gap between October and January? So just put the year, but put, when you work there, and then the second line, if you've had any budgetary or people responsibility, manage budget of X, supervise 3 people. And otherwise, and then go to the next section. Do not list job duties. So many people list job duties, and it's not relevant. A new employer wants to know, tell me what kinds of problems you've solved in the past and how that might help you in this role. So it's important to have 2 or 3, that's all bullets, starting with verbs that show things that you've actually done. Completed, developed, implemented, produced. And show a metric if possible. Implemented an office management system, which by 15%. So have a metric, start with a verb. And like I said, don't list past jobs which you didn't enjoy, or even accomplishments that you didn't enjoy, because guess what? They're going to ask you about that. Then I think it's important to list education. If you're in a program that hasn't finished yet, you could say, currently expected to graduate, X year, and update that as you go. I think professional qualifications are good if they relate to what you're seeking. I think awards are good if they relate to what you're seeking. And I've on hobbies, I've always liked to see a few hobbies because it shows me the kind of person you are, shows me a little bit about your character. And of course, if you've had any professional membership. So these are just things to consider as you start to document your CV. The best, as you start to look for new opportunities, and by the way, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, of course, you need that marketing template we just talked about. The good news is you don't need a resume. So the map is not the territory. I think the best jobs do not exist until you show up. But if you're going to apply for actually real open jobs that are pending, I suggest to send what's called a T-chart. I don't suggest sending cover letters because normally no one reads them. Although I have to tell you, if you're going to send a cover letter, here's the strategy. Send your resume and cover letter to the CEO of the company you'd really like to work at. Send it overnight, Federal Express. He or she will never see it, but his or her assistant will. And they'll send it to HR, who will respond right away to this. Trust me, it's a good strategy that I suggest. Anyway, a T-chart is where you have on the left side of the piece of paper the requirements that the employer is looking for, and on the right side you list exactly what you have. So you make it easy for them or the software. If you have to respond to an advertisement, stay away from discussing salary. Remember, you lose leverage when you haven't been offered a job. So say, say open, flexible. I expect a competitive salary, but really try to stay away from the conversation of money until you're actually offered something. Okay, let's talk a little bit about networking. I think informal networking is really important, and it's a lot less threatening, by the way, to talk to people in this way. And when you have informal networking meetings, leaving your resume, people aren't going to throw those away. They're going to do something. with it. As a tip, you should check your social media. Make sure there's nothing out there that would embarrass you. Do a Google search, type in your name, which is always interesting, and see what's out there. So on your own, you might stop the video now. I want you to make a list. I call this the A, B, and C list. The A list is everybody that you know, because they know people who hire. The B list are managers. What people do you know that hire people? Because they will know other people who hire people. And the third column, I call it the C list. Who do you know? Maybe it's a few people that actually hire in the field that you're seeking. So you have your list, and I'll let you read this. I won't go through this in detail, but with the A list, from now on, every time you see people that are on that list, say, hey, by the way, what's up? Blah, blah, blah. Hey, did you know I've decided to become a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer or whatever it is that you want to do? And they'll be like, oh, okay, that's nice. And all you're doing is you're practicing. But, it only takes one of those informal people on your A list to say, hey, by the way, I know somebody who, you might talk to. Your B list, those are managers. Try to set up, some informal meetings. And your C list is when, you find a mentor or someone who's really doing what you want to do. And you're going to ask more specific questions, which I'll show you what to do here in a minute. I'm not going to read through these, but I've given you a list of things you could ask your C list. So once you have informal meetings with people who are hiring in the areas that you want to work, there are lots of questions that you can ask, which I think, are very valuable. And I'll let you look at this on your own. I'll skip a few slides here, which you could read. I think it's important with a career brand to start treating yourself as you incorporated. So just like a salesperson would keep track of their sales calls and what the prospect said and when they need to follow up next, you need to do the same thing for you. And I like following up on email, not text, because psychologically people tend to respond to emails better. They file them, they respond, you have a tracking system and so on. But start to think about yourself as you incorporated, and you have your own list. You could stick it on your phone or software or wherever you want. But the idea is, who do you need to reach? What do they say? What are the next steps? And so on. So on your own, I would like you to practice what I call an elevator talk. Imagine that you're on an elevator, and usually it's taboo to talk to somebody, but in this case you are. Imagine you have less than a minute, right? And you're going up the elevator and someone says to you, hey, how you doing? Not in a creepy way, of course. And says, hey, so tell me about you. And you say, I am again, thinking about your passion, thinking about your career brand, thinking about something that you really, really want to do. I work with, describe the kind of people that you want to work with, and I enable them to explain exactly what you want them to do. And smile. The most muscles we have are in our face. And when you smile, it reinforces and gives you confidence towards what you really want to do. So I want you to practice this elevator talk on your own. So keep in mind, you got to stay focused. Once you come up with your career brand, and you make sure it's something you're passionate about, and you've aligned your abilities and interest, and it's congruent with what you value, stay on your path. Don't let someone knock you out. Remember, you're the one that has to get up and go to work for, over a third of your life. And you want to make sure it gets you closer to what you want and not farther away from your dreams. I have a section on interviewing. I'm not going to go through this in detail. I'd like you to read this on your own. I'm just going to point out a few things. Keep in mind that employers are looking for 3 words: can, will, and fit. Can you do the job? And typically they can tell just from looking at the resume. What's more important is, will you do the job? Are you motivated? So you have to be able to show them why what you're applying for fits what they're looking for. And then finally fit, you know, do you fit with the rest of the team? And so this is why it's important to do research to figure out and be able to explain, you know, why you're a good fit. So I've given you some information here on interviewing, which I'd like you to cover on your own. Ideally, you would want to practice this with another person. A lot of people are afraid of interviewing. When I ask students, so you know, what are some of the most common questions that you hope you don't get? The one I hear the most is, well, tell me about your weaknesses. And I think that's a poor question. But if you get that, I think the best way to respond uh, is something like this. Well, you know, there's lots of things I'm not good at. For example, and list something that has nothing to do, of course, with the job you're applying for. And say something, well, you know, like, for example, I'm not really good at this, but what I am really good at and what I'm excited about is this job will allow me to do that is X, Y, Z. So you want to quickly shift the focus back if you get a silly question like that. If you get questions about, you know, what are some of the difficult situations you've had in the past or difficult people you work with, just have a few examples in mind, and then you can quickly, you know, go through that story. I think most important, it's that, you know, by the way, when you know what you're passionate about and when you're excited about your career brand, you love interviewing. Every question is amazing because it comes from your heart. But when you apply for just a job, it comes from your head and you get nervous and you don't respond very well. But if you get a question that you're not sure about, the best way to deal with that is to smile and repeat the question. So you're asking me, have I ever encountered someone like this before? Well, that short pause will enable you to respond in a good way. Just a point on clothes, I think it's always important to be conservative. You know, don't dress with anything that is going to call the attention to it, because you want the interview to focus on you and not let the normal biases work in, which of course always happen. I also suggest not to wear new clothes to an interview because, you know, then you're focused on the new clothes. But that's just my idea. So I've given you lots of questions that you can ask in an interview. I think that would be helpful. And we're going to skip this question on information on negotiation. I just want to point out to you that, you know, you have a right to negotiate. And, you know, it's important to not be insecure here. If someone offers you a job offer, do not accept right away. Say, you know, it sounds great. It's going to be great to work here. I'm excited, but I require 24 hours to consider this. And then you go home and you make a list of what they told you, and you think about what else you might want. And then you go back the next day and always ask for 15% more. Because normally you'll get it. And if not, you'll be able to then say, well, you know, I understand, but then the only thing I require is an extra week's vacation. So in other words, you have on your bucket list something else to offer in exchange if you cannot do this. But, you know, most of the time when you go from one job to another, it's fairly easy to negotiate for 15% more. I want you to start to think about how are you going to measure your development as you move forward with your career brand. You know, if you don't measure it, it doesn't get done. So to summarize, you know, I really believe if you can dream it, you can achieve it. Have big dreams. You know, I've said this before, but it's just as easy to have small dreams as big dreams. So, you know, why not have big dreams? I think life and work happiness is possible. You know, when you love your work, you can't tell the difference between work and play, Monday and Friday, you know, vocation and vacation. And I think at the end of the day, it's important not to ever measure yourself against someone else. I think it's important to measure yourself against your own goals. And when you get to your own goals on time, you're successful. So in summary, believe in yourself, then others will start to believe in you. So I hope you've enjoyed this. I encourage you to go back through this and do the exercises, and you'll start to feel really secure about your career brand. All right, until next time, have a great night or evening. Take care.